Hi, everyone. This is Jer, and welcome to episode 5 of Halfway. Tonight, we are hosting composer Mark Menza. Mark, it is so great to see you. I appreciate you agreeing to do this. Tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing today, and then we'll go back in time and just kind of explore how all this started for you.
Sure. Well, Jeremy, thanks for having me. And this is really great. I love what you're doing with this podcast. So I'm a composer and sound designer. I do original music for TV and film and other types of media, including art installations and sometimes pieces for videos and media, all kinds of media that winds up sometimes just on the internet. On the scoring side, I do original music to picture. Sometimes I'm being asked to write a song. So sometimes songwriting, which is a very different skill set than scoring musically. Sometimes we're just doing arrangements of existing pieces. And then as a sound designer, I'm doing audio post-production for those same projects. A lot is for independent film, documentary, and episodic TV. The independent film stuff I've been working on is usually mixed here in this room, which is a surround sound mix stage. Uh, uh, and that involves doing, cleaning up production audio and sound design and final mixing to deliver that for theatrical.
When I reached out a few weeks ago, you mentioned a project at UTD, University of Texas at Dallas, with a professor that you and I both know, and it's been many years since I've seen him, Todd Fector, I believe. Can you talk about that project?
Professor Todd, yes. So Todd Fector and I have worked on several projects over the past 7 or 8 years. And this one is really fun. He's doing actually an installation art piece. And it has a Western theme to it. I won't spoil it. I'll let Todd introduce it when you interview him. It was a great opportunity for me to go back and do some barroom piano, which was fun. That was an element of the score that he was looking for. The characters are really fun. The concept of the piece is very interesting. It uses projection mapping and some traditional animation on a screen, as well as a big physical stage that he built. And it's really wonderful. And I got a chance to play a lot of great stuff. And one of the fun things at the end of it, actually, that we did is I found, I used Home on the Range, which of course is public domain now. And we did kind of a Johnny Cash version of that for the credits.
Can you talk about how all of this started for you in your education early on? What interested you in music, production in general, and even going back to college?
Sure. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I was not originally from Texas. I grew up in Western New York. I did my undergraduate work, and I learned at during my time there about University of North Texas, and I knew they had a great graduate program there in music theory and composition. So I came down to Texas. Initially, I had some family here, and it was a great conduit for me to come down and visit the school and figure out, yeah, this could be a really good graduate opportunity. So I came here, went to North Texas, did my master's in theory and composition, and then I stayed here. I started to put down some roots. I got into the music scene. Dallas, Fort Worth was really growing at that time. So I came down in the early 80s and did my graduate work. I started teaching. I wound up teaching at a community college for several years, in addition to private teaching. And, like a lot of artists have to kind of cobble together an existence. We often don't, unless you're working in some, like for a company that has hired your particular skill. And that happens a lot. I mean, there's video departments or audio departments that are sometimes present in larger corporations. But for the vast majority of artists, like myself and my wife is an artist as well, um, we have to kind of do several different things. We have to wear a lot of different hats. So I was doing some studio work. There used to be a thing that you could do called being a music copyist. And I was a music copyist for some of the time. I was teaching some of the time. I was playing. I was sometimes working on a film project. And I eventually I was ghostwriting a little bit for another composer here in town. When they would have an extra project, they would push it my way and say, "Hey, can you knock this out for us?" So I began to slowly learn about how the industry works. And just through connections that I made, I eventually found myself writing more and more, getting more and more writing jobs, and finally got to the place where I was doing that full time.
Yeah, going back to North Texas, I just remember that being just a melting pot of creativity. There was so much opportunity to collaborate
100.
with everyone around you, whether it was the art school or the music school or the film school. There was just so much opportunity. And, that power of collaboration, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
And I've even had a conversation with my son, Jack, who is a carbon copy of me. And it talked about the power of collaborating with others and sharing your ideas and going through that process and not being afraid to fail and learning from those failures.
I think, Jeremy, that's a really important point. People don't realize that they often think about musicians and artists, like the art that you do, um, where we're some Geppetto, working away in our studios, working away at some project. And then so many months goes by and out it pops. And sometimes there's projects like that. Songwriters are probably more like what I just described. But what I really love to do, and I go back to our time at DNA when we were there together, that collaborative situation, that was like when I first got my studio out of my home and I was around 300 some odd other creatives every single day, often 6, 7 days a week we were there. Um, and I realized this is really what it's all about. One of the things I love about being in the film and TV world, and even the immersive art world, is that it's a team effort. It's like being on the football team, and everybody kind of has a job to do, and your job is, as a lineman, is just as important as, say, the quarterback, who maybe people are watching more. And yes, there's a director of the film, and but then there's gaffers and second ADs and composers and sometimes sound design. Sometimes I work on a project. I'll get sent a project. It'll come out of the blue from somebody in Atlanta or LA or New York or even overseas. And there happens to be an actor here in the Dallas area, even that resides there, or somebody that's maybe here doing another project. Um, I had an opportunity. Clancy Brown, who's a well-known actor, he's done a lot of TV and film. He was famously in Shawshank Redemption. He also is the voice of Mr. Krabs for SpongeBob. He was here shooting some show for CBS. I don't know that anybody was aware of it at the time. And he had to do 3 episodes of SpongeBob where he had to do just his parts for it. So he came in here and cut those. The director, just like you and I are doing now, with the technology that we have, we're able to listen in and direct him remotely. And he knocked out 3 episodes. And and so sometimes you're just working on this one little part of it for a project. So, I don't even, you don't really get a credit for doing that. Maybe it's on, I don't know, it might be on IMDb. I don't know. But, but that's the fun part about this. So sometimes I worked on that show Atlanta a little while ago, where somebody had to record an actor who actually lived kind of in the North Texas region. So sometimes you're doing a small part of the team. You're just kind of coming on special teams, and sometimes you're a more protracted role, either as a composer or as the audio post, supervisor, or just doing all the audio posts on a film. I work on a lot of smaller independent films and shorts where I've written the score and then they approve the score. And at the same time, I'm doing dialogue cleanup and getting that part of the process ready. Then we go on to doing all the sound design, which includes hard effects, door slams or explosions or gunshots or cars racing by or whatever. And then simple things like Foley, like what the actors interact with, and picking up car keys, drinking, eating, footsteps, and then at the very end, you're layering in the music that you've created or another composer has created, and you're mixing that whole thing together in some surround format, or just stereo or some other immersive format.
So when you were working on the feature film Jimmy Neutron and even the films after that, did you recognize a lot of the other artists, especially the young ones, that maybe you were coaching or guiding or teaching? Did you see yourself having that influence on others? Because you were very polished in what you were doing, and there were a lot of us that were fresh into the industry, right? But then there were veteran, production people. But did you recognize that at the time, or were you focused on the work itself?
I never really saw. Yeah, I never really saw myself in any kind of a leadership role, and that really, I mean, I was very impressed by Keith Alcorn and John Davis. They were really sort of like the captains of the team, and I never really. Everybody else was a colleague, and I was there as a subcontractor. My entire business, the studio that I built out, was really just subcontracting, meaning I was also working for other projects besides their projects at the same time. Um, all throughout that time, I worked on an anime series called Dragon Ball GT and scored 65 episodes of that. So while we were doing cutting dialogue and, I had a crew of people helping put dialogue together. So again, I really, I don't know that I learned more from being in that environment. I remember going home. You talk about like, wow, it wasn't a bad day. I remember going home every day and telling my wife, "Wow, this is so great. I wish I wish I had embedded myself and my business in another business's entity like this where I could walk out of my room and I'd walk down the hall and there was all these artists creating this amazing stuff. Downstairs with the storyboard artists were Paul and Joe Riley and all those wonderful folks were Ken Tony, and I would see them creating all this art, Rod Douglas. Oh my gosh, it was amazing stuff. And then to see how that transformed its way through, through where they would start to create modeling and create the characters and turn it into, then there was the character designers and the art department and as well as the story department. I remember all the big gator boards that were up on the walls with all the cards and how they could move scenes around. So for me, it was like going to school all over again. It was an education all over again where I was like, oh, this is how they lay out a major film. This is how they figure out scenes. And the thing about animation, which is maybe both a blessing and a curse is they can fiddle away with it just forever. They can say, "Oh, but what if we move the scene over here and we just change how we animate the other? What if we?" And live action doesn't really have that luxury. When they lock a reel of film and send it for me to work on, they're done. They really can't. Like, wouldn't it be great if he had said this? Yeah, but he didn't, and you don't have this, so never mind. You know,
Yeah, and as a creative, when is something ever finished? I mean, back at UNT when I was welding stainless steel and a studio artist, when is this thing done? I want to continue working on this, tinkering on this, just improving it. There's never really a final version. Speaking of the digital world, especially with software and technology, you have this endless amount of tools at your disposal.
yeah, the level of iteration. You're absolutely right. The level, and I think that that's true. That has transcended the entire I think creative industry. Um, uh, I'll diverge here for a moment. My wife is a visual artist, and she does a lot of light based art and display art as well as art installation pieces. And she's moving into doing a lot more public art. Uh, but traditionally, she's also done a lot of oil on canvas pieces, and it's really great. She gets to do a painting. It's like, well, here's the painting. You've made this thing, and here it is. If you like it, you can have it. You can buy it. If you don't, okay, it's gonna sit over here and, like, recently she sold series of paintings. Some of them, she says, "Oh, yeah, that those 2 paintings have been sitting at this gallery. They've been there 5 years." Um, so the paint does dry in that world. In our world, it is it is an iterative process that goes on indefinitely until somebody pulls the plug, and usually the plug puller is the producer. It's the director's job to say, "I wanna go to the moon. We are going to the moon. I wanna go to the moon. The moon is gonna make this film great." And the producer goes, "That's a wonderful idea. We're going to Cleveland. Welcome to Cleveland, because we have money to go to Cleveland, and then after Cleveland, you're done." And, there's another analogous story. I've told this story a bunch of times. There's a guy at the Steinway Piano Factory, and he polishes the black pianos, the ebonized piano, and he polishes and polishes and polishes. And I watched this story about it one time. It was fascinating watching him make this piano. Of course, I have an interest in that because of my music background. I was like, oh, cool! That's how I make Steinways. Oh, that's neat. They bend the wood, and they're interviewing this guy who's at the last step. They take you all the way through the process, and they end up, and he's polishing the piano. And the guy's like, the interviewer saying, "Well, this is really beautiful because well, the shine you get is great, and these are the things you use to make it look shiny. How do you know when it's done?" He goes, "It's not done. They just take it away from me." The producer goes, "Okay, we're gonna take this now, and thank you for your service," and away they go. And, that's the job of the director, and, you know, as people on the team, whether I'm being a composer, whether I'm being a sound designer, whether I'm just doing some ADR, I work at the pleasure of the director, and It's very different once again than writing being like a songwriter, which I admire, and I wish I had time to do that. Maybe in my retirement someday, I'll sit around and write 3.5-minute songs. Cool. But in the meantime, I work at the pleasure of a director or a producer, which sometimes in small films is often the same. I just worked for this director producer out of South America, Ali Muratiba, and he's got 3 films at Sundance. He's an Oscar nominated. He's been Oscar nomination for one of his shorts a few years ago, and he's hoping the one we just finished gets nominated. He's pitching it right now. Um, and he kept saying, "Is it okay if we do this?" I was like, "Dude, it's your film. What do you wanna do?" My job is to try to get it to come out of the speakers the way you imagined it, or something better that you didn't imagine. As creatives, we gotta keep bringing something new to the table.
It's a bit of a curse. When I was at iStation, one of my roles was to direct and produce the video shoots. And the late, great Clint Worth, he was actually one of my students. He passed away several years ago. An amazing individual, had a huge heart. He was also a comedian here in Dallas. And I bet I drove him crazy on those shoots because sometimes we'd do a take, not 2 or 3 times. It'd be 15 or 20 times because you're trying to get it just perfect. And there was another option or you had another idea. And I mean, in fact, I know I drove him crazy, but I loved him very much. And he was just an incredible asset and team member at iStation. He worked there quite a long time. He started as an intern, making nothing, and just, again, had a big heart. And think of him often, these days, just because of that experience. And that was talk about collaboration. Just really, really nice. And of course, it's nowhere near a feature film, but those were great productions to really hone your craft.
That's the process. What you just described, I think, is the process for all of us. I will listen to a piece that I did. One of the things I work on is I've been working. Gosh, it's been on and off for about 6 years. I've been working on a game for a game company that's local. I sometimes don't talk to them for months at a time, and then I'll work on a piece. And I go back and I tell you that story because when I go back to work on a new piece, I'm just starting one now for them. I have to remind myself of some things. I have to go back and go, oh, what was that second theme I did in that one cue? Because I kind of like that. I have to remember what the harmony was under there. Like, what was the chord progression underneath the theme? And because I don't want to do it again. I want to do like a variation on it, like reharmonize my theme and build it into this new cue that has this new, you know, it has sort of like a new mandate for what it has to be. Um, and 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 then when I listen to those older cues, I'm like, "Oh, I could have gone like you were just saying. Oh, I could go back and change that. Oh, well, it's done." Sometimes I'm also surprised at for the for the all the times I think, "Oh, I could go back and start playing with that some more." I think, "Oh, that turned out better than I remembered it." Sometimes the advantage of time, if it's been like 6 months since you've looked at something that you did, and you're not looking at the minutia of, "Oh, I don't like that walk cycle," or, "I don't like the way that kid acted in there and said that line, and I spent a lot of time in that." And when you step back and take a little bit more of a 5,000-foot view of it by coming back 6 months later, you're like, "Oh, that really works." As artists, and this is a conversation that goes the thing that you and I are talking about right now is a conversation that happens in my home on nearly a daily basis because my wife and I will talk about she's brought me in and looped me in on some projects, um, many of which have been some of the more interesting things I've done. And sometimes you think, oh, collaborating with your spouse, that's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, so I worked with my wife about 7.5 years at iStation, and I understand completely. She pulled rank on me. She's a heck of a lot smarter than I am. But yeah, that's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah. And there are, but again, because of the industry that we've worked in, film and TV specifically, and the gaming side of it for sure, I serve at the pleasure of that director, and I just treat her like the director, and I'm like, "Well, this is her commission." We did a commission 3 years ago with the city of Dallas, the Dallas Symphony, and TACA, which is the Commission on the Arts. Ridiculously elaborate piece, that I can go into in depth if you want to. It was probably one of the more interesting, immersive art installation pieces that we've done. A performance piece, to be sure. She had multiple huge screens set up, like each screen was like the size of a movie theater screen nearly that she rented, and there was 4 of them, and then the audience came into a space between, between these 4 screens the way they were arranged, and then behind them, they were rear projected, were these massive projectors that we rented. And then we had 4 musicians from the Dallas Symphony. But all throughout the process of creating this thing, because she spent a tremendous amount of time on the animation with an animation uh, programmer, expert, artist named Joel Levis, and her and Joel collaborated for a little bit over a year creating the real time animation. And it was a 40, well, I should know, so it was a 42-minute piece, and it was 5 movements of music. I did probably the stupidest thing I've ever decided to do in my life. Glad I did it. I will never do it again unless somebody gets me drunk enough. Where one of the things we spend a lot of time, you talked about iterative process. We're having a dialogue about how making art is iterative. One of the things I spend a stupid amount of time doing is editorial. And I'm often in some workstation, such as Pro Tools, which is a very popular editorial program. I use it for audio post production, music production, recording in general, along with digital performance. And there's a lot of great platforms out there. Well, I decided I was going to edit this piece in real time as a piece of performance art. Let me tell you how stupid an idea that was. There was 5 movements. Each one was about 6 or 7 minutes long, and we had a violist, cellist, a clarinetist, and fantastic players from DSO, and a percussionist, and who is Eric Farrar, who teaches at UTD, uh, also an animator. So he was really in on doing this project. He's a musician and a really good skilled like jazz drummer and percussionist. So I wrote a vibes part that he was playing, and then we had these just world class musicians on this. And what happened was, so there's 4 live performers, and then I had created tracks of pre-recorded piano, synthesizer, percussion, lots of electronic like soundscape stuff that all in real time was driving this animation through software called Touch Designer. So Touch Designer has the ability to take multiple inputs, audio inputs, and use them to drive and do, generative animation. So the generative thing's been around for a while. People have been doing generative art for a long time. So I thought I'd take it to the nth degree, if you would. So we were feeding 9 stems of music in real time. So we had a live mixer guy to the touch designer, and then in real time it was creating all this animation on these 4 screens around the audience while the musicians are playing.
Was it fractals or what type of imagery was getting generated?
Oh man, it was all, if you go to her website, you see it. Some of it was big cubes that were flying around. Some of it was very much wow, like lots of particle animation. Some of it was big washes of color that were just moving. It across the 5 movements, it really changed. Well, that would have been fine if that's what I had decided to do, but what I decided to do was really stupid. So these players play live parts on top of my pre-recorded tracks to a click that was in their ears. I would conduct them in, and I would record them in real time. So 5 minutes would go by, movement 1 ended, and what the piece was about, and the reason that I was there and the reason I had it all set up in Pro Tools is I took bits and pieces of what they had just performed, and the piece was composed and designed where I would take like 8 bars of this, and 16 bars of this, and 10 bars, and I would edit it into the next movement and flip it around, send it to like processors that were doing delays and things. Imagine you've recorded these guys and you've taken 8 bars and you're running it through a guitar pedal. And then you take the same 8 bars and right after that, right on the downbeat of the next measure, you're running it through a delay pedal. And then you take a different 8 bars and you're running it through a distortion pedal, and so on and so on. And they were really like, I was using things called sound toys that were doing a lot of filtering. And sometimes I would take that 8 bars and flip it around. Meaning I would play it backwards so that you would what happens is these players then when they started the second movement, they were listening to their former selves from 5 minutes earlier, and they were playing that as a layer along with the keyboards and synth and percussion that was pre-recorded. It wasn't just an exercise in like, "Oh, let's see if we can audio edit it." The piece that she came up with was about kind of what we're talking about, in that how we now interact with technology. The fact that, and the audience was hip to this from the program, like, this is what's happening. So my editing was part of the performance. I was up on a stage with two monitors. People could watch me and understood that I was manipulating the sound in real time. Sitting next to me was the animation guy, and he was able, because we were feeding all of this audio as separate stems to Touch Designer. He was driving that visual boat, and then on the other side of me, to my right, was um, essentially the front of house mixer. He was mixing the audio, everything that the audience was hearing, meaning the live players, all the feeds I was sending them, the now edited audio of the players from moments earlier, as well as all my pre-recorded tracks, and then my wife's spoken word stuff, just to make it
Yeah, it reminds me of the analogy herding cats in a hurricane. There's all these moving parts.
Yeah, it was fun to do.
So let's plug your wife's website for a second here. What's her website again?
CarmenMenzaArt.com. CarmenMenzaArt.com. There's a whole page just about that piece. And we've done some other installation pieces. We did, I don't know if you're familiar with the Aurora Festival, but the Aurora Festival. So we were early participants in that, and we did a short film that we used some of John Davis's astrophotography in.
John's creativity was incredible.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. His time lapse star photography stuff, which we leveraged some of that footage, was really fun. It was really fun to do, and we revisited it recently. Our son is grown now; he's college age, but it's fun to go back and see some clips of it. There's a little clip of it, like basically we made a trailer teaser for it for the Aurora Festival, and it's on my website. In fact, if you see it, the piece was called Dream Big, and it was about a kid's dreams and how we dream as kids about what we want to do, and we throw the plane. So he throws all these paper airplanes, and at the very end, one of them comes back to him, and like he's like, "Oh, what is this? Well, how is that possible?" So the idea about Dream Big, you can be anything you want to be. So it was a piece about inspiring stuff. And somebody actually saw that piece, and then we did another, as a result of that, we did another interactive piece at Aurora that was kind of the inspiration for the immersive piece I described earlier. We did a piece with Touch Designer once again, where I had just two players that came in and recorded a violinist. He's Gary Levinson, who's the associate concertmaster of the DSO, and a jazz musician, Freddie Jones, amazing jazz trumpet player. He plays the national anthem at all the Cowboys home games. And Freddie and Gary both played on this piece I wrote called Refugee. And at the time, it was about what was going on in Eastern Europe, where there was a lot of turmoil. And I wrote this piece about what was happening there as kind of a tribute to that. But in the piece itself, the structure of it, I had elements of jazz and elements of classical music, chamber music. So the piece is kind of a modern day chamber piece featuring jazz trumpet, if you will, or if you will, a jazz piece featuring a classical violinist. I tried to write to their strengths, but in the middle of the piece is an opportunity for each of the players to improvise. And the piece was about 6 minutes long, and its intention was that it will loop all night long at the Aurora Festival. And then that piece of music in its 6-minute version would play and drive Touch Designer in real time, but they set up Touch Designer such that it would infinitely change throughout the evening for a couple, 3 hours. And I wanted the music to be different and to drive Touch Designer, drive the software differently. And one of the things we did so I built this improvisation section into the piece, and we invited the community at large to come out and play on the piece, meaning I want you to be part of this piece of art we are creating in the moment. So we had some students from Booker T who came with trombones and played. The score was published online about 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time, and I put it up there in C, B flat, A flat, E flat. So sax player, E flat sax player, alto player or bari player, B flat tenor player, B flat soprano, B flat trumpet, a C player, which would be trombone or anybody flute, and we had some takers, as well as Freddie came back out and played a couple of choruses for us, and Gary came out. He had a concert at the symphony that night. Came over in his full black tie, got up there and played an iteration of it. So we had people who were dancing in real time to it. So other disciplines were happening. One of the things that I really like doing when I do these pieces is taking down the velvet rope. I think when you take kids particularly to a museum, they look at first and wonder at all this amazing art, but we don't want them to touch it. There's the velvet rope up there, and be careful, that's a Van Gogh, and I understand it because it's we place a high monetary value on those things. So the idea that something bad could happen to it, uh, is serious business. But when we're creating a piece of art, we want to take that velvet rope down and have people interact with like truly interact with the art. So that's a lot of these interactive pieces I've done where, okay, I want to take what you just played and change it and play it back to you. And then now you play over it, or maybe you improvise to it. So improvisation is a huge part of the creative process for me. My background is not just in classical stuff, but also in jazz. So the idea of improvising, playing something in the moment, which is a really important process for artists, and it's a really important process for listeners. You know, when you go to a concert and you say, "Oh, I want to go see this rock concert," we've kind of spoiled that a little bit because people want to hear that guitar solo that's on the album. I'm like, no, and I understand it. There's a great audience for that, and I don't mean to demean that or diminish that in any way, but maybe one of the reasons I enjoy listening to jazz artists more, um, say sometimes than rock artists who improvise. Not to open up a can of worms, but that's not going to happen with AI. Not because it doesn't do a great job, but because I don't get to experience the process of what that artist is telling me in that moment.
Yeah, for example, I'm writing, or I have been writing a book of short stories. If you want to call it a novel, I've been working on it a lot of years, called Halfway, the inspiration for this podcast. But it's actually a small town in Northwest Texas. My father grew up in a small town surrounded by adversity. And it started out as a book of short stories. And it was a way of me learning more about my father's childhood, especially after he passed away. I started making connections because there were cousins and uncles and aunts telling me things, random people I didn't even know because I was so little at the time when my father was telling me the stories. But then in my early 20s, people were telling me the same stories and I was making these amazing connections. And so that's what inspired me to start writing. And again, I was doing it for myself. I wasn't doing it to get published. I was doing it to learn more about my father's life as a kid. And I value that
That
tremendously.
sounds
And if
wonderful.
it turns into something later on, fantastic. But
Yeah.
it's a story. It's a great story. Small town USA, Americana. And it's about a boy who is helping raise his brothers and has to make his own fun in this small town called
Mhm.
Halfway. So you've got all these people coming to you for various projects. How has AI impacted your world, your work, your productions? Are you embracing it, or you're like, oh, hold on for a second, stay right over there in your little box, don't need you?
Um, Well, not surprisingly, it's been on the top of people's minds in the last couple of years. I think we're looking at the tool of AI, and it's another tool, just like I talked earlier about the software that helps people do music copying now, and there's no longer copyists. Well, that was a job of tedium, and it was never really meant to be an art form. I think, is useful if it helps take some tedium out for creators. But what you spoke about is really, I think, is really genius, Jeremy, in that it's the process. Like, why would you want, why would you want AI to write this story about your father's life for you? The process of writing, even if no one ever reads it, is so very important for artists. For whether you're an author, whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're a musician, whether you're a painter, even if no one ever sees your painting, the process of putting that medium onto a canvas and creating something is really important. And I think people miss the point about AI. And I just went to a seminar recently with Paul Slavens, a well-known musician here. He had a band called Ten Hands back in the day. Um, Great musician out of Denton. And he did a wonderful seminar down here that we sat in one evening about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he was saying, if you can make something with AI and it brings you joy, well, then do it. That's great. And what he was doing was taking lyrics he had written, and he didn't really feel like writing a song to it. Cool. Feed it into AI and get a song back. It sings to you, and if it brings you joy, let it bring you joy. I get a tremendous amount of joy, just like I think I would imagine you would when you write your story, from creating music, from the act of doing it. Like, do I love it when it's done? Sometimes that's irrelevant. Sometimes it's irrelevant how great you think the piece is tomorrow. It's what I feel like what I'm doing in the moment that I'm
Yeah,
doing.
and you learn a lot about yourself in the process. I mean, it's an unbelievable lesson, whatever the project is. If I'm building a guitar or writing a story or directing a shoot or whatever, you learn a lot about yourself by doing that, by going through those motions, by making those mistakes. And I think there's value there that exponentially grows.
Yeah, huge value. And sometimes I have to just sometimes we have an internal dialogue with ourselves. Like you're talking about, well, now computers do it all. Well, not really. I'm writing stuff down every day. When I'm sitting here at my desk with my keyboard, this is always here. This is the scariest thing a composer can ever see. Okay. It's a blank sheet. So until it starts looking, still starts looking more like this, you haven't really, that is fun. When I come in the next day and I see that, I'm like, oh, I that was good. That's like to me, that's like a gardener going out and going, "Oh, look, the plant's all sprung up overnight. I worked on it and I see some fruit of my labor." So that's fruits of our labor as artists. When you go back the next day and you fought your way through a sequence trying to make the animation work and you didn't think it was looking weird, it wasn't smooth. You fought it and you come in the next day and go, "Oh, that's coming together." Do you think, Jeremy, that it takes the joy out of it? I mean, that was my takeaway from going to Paul Slavens' seminar and from myself having some experience using AI tools. And they can do some very interesting things. They don't have the ability yet. And this is one of the things that he stressed in his seminar, like, well, it doesn't do this yet. Like scoring the picture is very different than songwriting. Right now, all the AI tools out there really understand songwriting. Like it's cognizant in a sense of what a song like what a verse is versus a chorus versus bridge, and you literally put you like in this one piece of software he used called Udio, you just put in like verse, so that when you put verse again, you put it in parenthesis like a programming prompt, it'll say, oh, this has got to be the same music as this music was up here. So it knows verse from chorus, from pre-chorus, from bridge, sort of. It sort of does that.
I had just one of the most amazing experiences where I was invited to go to dinner with Patricia McLaughlin, who is a Newbery Award winning author. She wrote Sarah Plain and Tall. My wife had mentioned, I was sitting right next to her and said, my husband's working on a book of short stories. And I was like, oh, don't say that. I'm not a writer. I'm not a trained, I'm in the presence of greatness in this room. There were multiple authors in the room. And Patricia looks at me and says, tell me about it. And we're sitting there and I'm telling her about my story, halfway about my father's childhood. And she gave me one of the best pieces of advice that I will never forget. And she goes, don't worry about the punctuation and the grammar. Just tell your story. That's going to take care of itself. And I will use AI like that. I'll use it to check grammar and whatnot, but I just want to write. I just want to tell the story, get the narrative out, develop those characters, really draw out that scene. And I just thought that was really great because I think sometimes the technicalities or the rules, they get in our way. And the very next day we're leaving the hotel And we're sitting there waiting for, she's waiting for a cab, and I'm outside. I think I was waiting on Tracy. And she goes, "Send me your manuscript." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." And she read it and emailed me back and just said some really kind words. She's like, "This is really good. You need to continue working on this." So that was an amazing experience, and just grateful for that time. And she has since passed away, but think the world of those times and the advice that she gave me. I'll never forget it.
And getting this to express yourself and tell these wonderful stories about your father, that's important. That's what's important. You know what you wanna say when you say, "Oh, this particular chapter is gonna be about the time he did this." And yes, you get caught in the minutiae like, "Oh, I probably should not say that." Yeah, if there's a tool that'll clean that up for you when it's over, it's just like now we get in our cars, we don't think anything about it, but we hit a button, we go, "Hey, route me to home from wherever I am right now." There's some satellite that knows where you are in downtown somewhere. You're south of Dallas, 45 miles. I don't know the best route home. Can you see where all the traffic is and guide me home? Could you get out of, back in the day we had Maps Go or something. It's like, well, so is it cheating now? No. Is that a form of AI? Yeah, I don't know, sort of. But there's tools out there that will do mundane tasks. We see all these jokes and tropes about oh, I don't want AI to write my songs. I wanted to do my laundry. Used to do a lot of Foley, for example, that was me walking around in women's shoes trying to do trying to do a scene by putting in the footsteps, which is a very common and yes, tedious, mundane thing. It doesn't work 100% of the time. It maybe works 80% of the time, but there's a piece of software that allows me to play it at the keyboard. And I go and I have a plugin within Pro Tools, or it can be in any other DAW. It could be in Cubase or Logic or Digital Performer or Reaper or whatever you want. And there's a tool where you say, "I want this pair of shoes," and you're like, and people will say, "Yeah, but what if that pair of shoes doesn't sound right?" Well, what doesn't sound right? Well, it sounds too heavy. I can pitch it up. I can change. I can change the EQ of it, like it's too thuddy. Hang on, and in 2 seconds, it's not thuddy. And then I say, "Is it concrete? Is it gritty concrete? How about concrete with dirt?" Ah, there it is. Literally. And then I can EQ that thing. And then I can put it in a space. Is it outside or is it in a 3-car garage with the door down? Most of the time I add the reverb and the ambience in later because I've got a reverb already set up for that 3-car garage for all the other sounds I'm creating, like the door closing or the person coughing or a rock falling on the ground or whatever else is happening in the scene. So I've got interior garage reverb with 900 milliseconds on it. Solid. A little bit of bass rolled off, a little bit of high end banging around the room. Sounds like a garage to me. So sometimes I'll use just that reverb for the footsteps, but there's dozens and dozens of shoes. There's dozens and dozens of surfaces, and there's dozens of ways to manipulate it as far as EQ, even like compression, like it's got a limiter and a compressor in it in that one tool with all the shoes to go, "Oh, that shoe is just like, it sounds like I'm right on top of it. Turn off the compressor. Oh, that's better. That sounds like where the camera is, because the camera is maybe back. Maybe it's a wide shot. So I want the shoes to sound like they're over there."
That joy is that creative process that we go through. It's a struggle. Nothing's ever perfect. And again, getting that paint on your hands and that sawdust in your clothes and making mistakes and the pile of lumber that's across the workshop that it might as well be firewood. That process continues to make us better as creatives. When I was at Richland College, I was teaching, I think my first class was a digital imaging class. And, you had all walks of life in there. You had the early students, you had the moms that were coming back, the dads coming back to school because they wanted to learn something new. And, Photoshop was a big thing, still is, but people wanted to learn Photoshop. And in this class, the first thing I told them, I was like, "Look, yeah, we're going to learn Photoshop, but I'm going to help guide and teach you how to tell a narrative, how to tell a story." And the analogy that I gave them was, if this was a creative writing class and our job is to tell a story, but we happen to be using Microsoft Word. I'm not teaching you what buttons to push in Microsoft Word. I'm helping you learn how to tell a better story. And it was a really amazing thing to watch, the dynamics in that room. And, speaking of collaboration earlier, they would just feed off each other and the software took care of itself. They knew the various features. They'd learn something new. They'd experiment. They'd fail. But they worked really, really hard at telling a better story. And I'd give them various themes. Sometimes it would be a comedy or a film one sheet or an advertisement. So I gave them various scenarios, but they had to come up with a narrative for that particular project. It was really great. Do you find the amount of features, like I use DaVinci Resolve for a lot of my video editing, some of my audio editing, and there's so many buttons, there's so many possibilities. Do you find that sometimes the technology can be distracting?
I love your analogy about photo because you're right. Photoshop is a very evolved piece of software, and it's really deep. I think the thing that and I've taught some in that environment, and what I used to tell students was just use what you need for now. Like um, if you're just trying to do a really cool drum sound and you're trying to do, let's say, 808 drum sounds, which is like typical in a lot of hip hop stuff, um, then just concentrate on that. Like pull up a piece of software like Battery or any of these other drum sample player programs. Same thing as a drum machine. It's just now a plugin. And just work on doing your kick and your snare and your hi-hats, and don't worry about all the other buttons on the screen, as you said, until you think you need something. And then when you say, I want to add a cowbell, is there a cowbell in here? And then you figure out, and you come away the next day going, oh, this tool, just like AI, has become useful. Another 5% for me because I know there's a cool cowbell in there. And then not only did I figure out the cowbell, but I figured out how to like turn the pitch of it down so it sounded a little thuggier to me. Awesome. You make a really great point here, but I think as artists, we need to use the word tools. Like it's a really great term, and not to make too much of it, but it's a great term in the sense of think of it like a plumber showed up and he's got a big toolbox, and there's 50 tools in that toolbox. But he really just needs to grab this one wrench. If he's good at his day, I'm going to need this, and I need a Phillips head. That's all he needs right now. He needs a pipe wrench and a Phillips head. He's going to undo that hose clamp, and then he's going to use his pipe wrench, and that's all he needed at the moment. So sometimes you go into these very elaborate tools, and yeah, they've made these GUIs very elaborate and very elegant looking, and you got to not get sucked into that. I learned that a long time ago because I've got every imaginable plugin, and I've got all the Vienna instruments, string, brass, woodwind, percussion, choir stuff, and then the huge library of native instruments and all the rest of this nonsense. Um, it's not going to write your piece for you, but if you need a sound, you're like, I wonder if I have this. I wonder if I have a dark sounding piano for this kind of moody scene. That's the impetus that you go into the tool and you go looking for. So I don't know that you need guardrails as much as an artist, you have to be focused on what you're doing in the moment. A million years ago, I used to give private guitar lessons and had lots of students. They were fun. It was great. It's an era now gone by, but I would tell students like, just worry about where you're at right now. You have to kind of meet students where they are. It's really easy, especially when you're younger and you're first teaching, to be like, oh, and you can do this, and you can do this, and do this. And like, don't do that. Like, go look, we're going to learn stuff here where you can understand it at first. And then we move to the next place. And then there's a logical progression to discovering the instrument, which is just like discovering the piece that you're working on. And I think you can look at every project, every piece of music, every piece of art that you create, every animation that you do, as discovering the thing. And as you get to the end of it, guaranteed you're going to learn more about some of the tools that you use to create that thing that you didn't know yesterday. And each project you learn a little bit more. When we got done with Jimmy Neutron, going all the way back to that era, and then we went on and did the Ant Bully feature, there was a whole lot that we took as a group of artists into that next feature. And I jumped off the series to start working on pre-production for the next feature. And I was like, oh, now I know what I'm doing. not at all, but I felt like I knew so much more than I had known 3 years earlier. And and now many iterations later, multiple films later, um, when I'm working on live action stuff, some of the stuff from the animation world translates. When I'm working on an animation piece, now some of the things, skill sets, or things you learn about a particular software tool translates back into the animation. We're like, oh, I did this on that. Hang on. I've got an idea. I had to like invariably I have to put somebody on a phone. There's a piece of dialogue and it has to sound like it's coming out of an iPhone, but it's got to be loud enough that we hear it in the mix. It's a stunt we all have to do in audio post all the time. It's the phone, it's a piece of audio playing on the car radio. We have a piece of music that plays on the car radio as a source cue or what's called a diegetic cue, which means it's in the scene, and then suddenly it comes out of the car speaker and it becomes full resolution, as it were, and it plays as a piece of score now. Now it's a piece of score, meaning that it's not necessarily diegetic, but it's playing for the purpose of the viewer. So when we hear a piece of score is really only for us, the viewer. The characters don't hear. When we watch Lord of the Rings, they're not Frodo's not hearing Howard Shore's score. That's only for us, the
You
viewer.
ever wish we could walk around with our own theme music playing in our
It'd be
head?
great. I try to do it as much as possible, but I have failed miserably at that. It plays in my ear, and then I can't really hear what orders my wife is giving me. So that's a bad thing. Trust me, I have tried it. I'm sorry, I'm listening to my theme right now. He cares less about that than I do, which I think is problematic. I'm listening to this is my theme music. This is about me right now. And actually, that never goes over very well in my house. That's quite
It's
honestly,
hilarious.
it's never about me. It's always about my wife, and then after that, it was about our son, who now thankfully is in college, so it's maybe a little bit more about me, like 8 to 10%. But yeah, the less it's about you, the better off life is going to be.
So a few weeks ago, my kids came to me in the house and said, "Hey, we were listening to your podcast, and they were like, why did you, make fun of mom, about her RBF, talking about her resting bitch face?" I was
Oh
like,
yeah,
"Have you not been paying attention all your life? That is a very good skill that she has mastered. That is a skill she's been born with. You can't teach that. You get that look. I just want to like disappear into the wall or something."
it's very yeah. It's a tool that she uses. Yeah,
That's right.
it's her own form of AI.
Her AI.
It's her own form of AI.
It's so great.
Um,
We love our wives. They make us better. So, Mark, when you were younger, what influences were you listening to? I was talking to John the Dad on the previous episode when I interviewed him, and we talked about the influence of 90s music, and I told him about the Oasis show that I had been to with Jude. But what were you listening to? Was it film scores, a little bit of everything?
really was film music. I've always been really, especially as an adult. I mean, I grew up, in the 70s playing guitar like everybody did. And I was playing guitar. I was listening to Beatles. I was listening to, Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, and all these kind of, more guitar based stuff because was my first instrument. I went to music school as a voice major. And then I went to graduate school as, we mentioned earlier, as a composition theory major. So fast forward then to after all that, what music was I listening to as I got into the industry and was actually writing? And it would absolutely be film and TV music. And I will tell you, and I've said this thousands of times to people, that we are living in a golden era of film score and television composition. And especially in I would say the last 5 or 6 years since COVID. And it's interesting how things that happen globally has an impact on entertainment in the same way that entertainment turns around and has an impact on culture and society. Um, so when we all sort of endured COVID, um, a lot of the streaming services became more popular. They became more profitable, and we had the inception and now the proliferation of the limited series. What's interesting about the limited series that we see on all the different streaming services, I won't waste the time to name them now, uh, is that they put a lot of production value into them, more so than say prime time cop shows, like Law and Order. The scoring for them is very elaborate, especially the sci-fi shows, but all the drama and comedy, you name it. They're almost nearly at the level for the limited series that they are for the same kind of films that they're releasing. But now it's I guess what I'm saying is now it's getting there. When you watch some of these limited series now, it's I think the lines are really blurred between high-end film production or higher end film production and the encroaching limited series stuff where they make maybe 8 or 10 episodes, but they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars per episode, and there's a lot of production value in them. I'm hearing live strings or I'm hearing, live orchestral stuff. They spend a lot of time doing them, very elaborately, and the scores are really well written. And composers that used to maybe only be doing feature films. And I will tell you in the world of major film production, you were either a film composer or you were a TV composer, and never the twain shall meet. We found this true about actors. You would see somebody who had been a television actor, and they would finally have to matriculate to getting into a film. If you had been an actor on a TV show like Cheers, it was going to, back in the day, or Friends, it was going to take some act of God. You were going to have to go away for a while as an actor and not be seen, and then suddenly resurface in a film. And you'd have to get a different agent. Like you had an agent for film and you had a completely separate agent for television and another agent for theatrical. There's a lot of really great creative music being written. There's also some filmmakers that sometimes, and I run up against this in the indie film world a lot, where they want to layer in a ton of songs. And the only thing that's keeping them from doing it is they can't license them all. Directors and producers who want to score their film by licensing a ton of pop songs. And I'm like, yeah, like there's a line in the verse that is about what that scene is about. But first of all, the song isn't really about that. The song is really it's not about love unrequited. It's really about how much he's moved on. So that's maybe the wrong messaging, but it's kind of about what your scene is about that you wrote and labored over and shot and edited and color corrected and animated and fixed in Cinema 4D. It's kind of about that. The problem is the rest of the song is not, and you've got dialogue going on. So how is the viewer even going to hear that one line about that you think has everything to do with this scene? So I think there's a lot of missteps that I see directors make by not going, look, we're living in this era when people can create some really evocative scores that really help tell the story that you're telling in 90 minutes in a really meaningful way without getting in the way of it. I just mixed a film the other day, and this guy had 2 songs written for it. Cool. Well, actually, one of them he had them redo House of the Rising Sun, which is public domain, and because he thought it was going to fit. I said, yeah, okay, that kind of fits what the scene's about. That's cool. So I get the song from the guys who made it for him, some friends of his. I said, well, this is great, but you're going to barely hear the song. By the time I turn it down enough in the mix that we can clearly hear the dialogue without this guy's competing, it kind of becomes ineffectual. So please send me the music separate, like the vocal separate of the music, the rest of the music track, so that I can mix the vocal, I can dodge the vocal, the lyric around the dialogue and keep the rest of it up as a piece of score underneath this. And then we'll hopefully hear enough of House of the Rising Sun and hear it sprinkle enough through there that we understand, like, oh, he's making a cool connection between that famous song and this scene. Got it.
So, Mark, what are some of your favorite film scores, say, of the 80s?
Oh, wow. Feature film, I'd have to look at the dates, although I think it's maybe the 90s, would be Chinatown. Jerry Goldsmith, trumpet lead, beautiful. That may have been late 80s. Faye Dunaway, John Huston. Fantastic, evocative score. It captures the era that film was taking place. It starts with Bernard Herrmann and Hitchcock and that collection. And then we see times where one of the other great collaborations obviously is Spielberg and John Williams. And the Star Wars, the opening theme to Star Wars, still to this day, I'm like, "That's pretty killer." Even when I hear it now and I will crank it up at home if we happen to go back and watch one of the older films or where they just simply bring the theme back, I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty great." That's really a great bit of writing. The brass writing by John Williams is fantastic. Rocketeer was a great score. That was, English composer, passed away. Oh, I'm having a moment here. I'll think of his name in a minute. He also wrote, Spitfire Grill, same composer. Um, uh, Wonderful sense of theme. I like when there's a recognizable themes. Fast forward, Howard Shore does a great job at that with his multiple themes, leitmotifs as they call them, all throughout the Lord of the Rings stuff. My wife is a great appreciator and lover of music, so she's like, "This is cool. I like this," and I'll go then and I just did it yesterday. I bought some music off of something I heard on a TV show that I'm using. I put in my inspiration folder for this game that I'm working on for this ambience cue that I'm doing. And so it goes. So yeah, you're always, um, do you need to know every piece of music ever? No. Do I need to know all film scores? No. Some things I hear it, and I'm like, oh, that's really good. Harry Gregson Williams, I love his writing. He did uh, he did The Martian, which is one of my favorite scores of recent films. A really great use, if you listen to that score separate of the film, it's a really great use of here's your theme in a bunch of different settings. So it's a wonderful study of theme and variations on how to take and it's a long note theme. So it's be da, and it's really beautiful. And then it shows up like, oh, there it is again. Later on when he's growing potatoes, and later on when he's getting rescued. And it comes back and like, oh, here's the exact same melody, but now it's heroic. Here it is, and now it's like it's resolved, and it's like, "I'm gonna die here." Here it is, and it's panic. Really well done.
So, Mark, as we close this out, what advice would you give a young person or an early career person who was wanting to get into this industry, whether it was composing music or being an audio engineer, sound engineer? So, what advice would you offer to them?
Um, that's a great question. Um, I think times have changed, and there are so much competition in this industry, no matter what job you're doing. But for musicians, like if you just take music as a branch, um, there's it's difficult. I have people come to me all the time and ask me that. I would say once a month I get a phone call or a email to that effect, and a lot of them want to go to maybe they want to take like a trade school route for music. Like, I want to study this, or I very, very often, more often than not, I get like, can somebody come and shadow you or be your apprentice? I'm like, no, it's really hard. As you probably know, as a creator, it's hard to be doing your creative thing, that process, while somebody's going, you know, somebody sent a student over from SMU last earlier this year to me, and they would come in and shadow me for a while. And I was like, first of all, you're not gonna get anything out of this. Um, Not anything meaningful, nothing that's gonna really carry you forward. And if you really wanna do this, if you really truly wanna be just like animation or any other discipline, whether it's dance, whether it's film, whether it's music, whether it's writing, doesn't matter. Um, you Some things you just really have to study. And I I say this not just because I went the traditional route of going to school and, um, the Animal House famous line about 7 years of college down the drain. But, 7 years of college, and that was just to get up, and that was back then. Today, schools like Berkeley, UNT, which we spoke of earlier, and 2 dozen across the country are grinding out every semester, are graduating, matriculating people with broad skill sets. If you really think you're gonna compete with them, unless you're a once in 100-year savant level composer who's got really creative different ideas, who shows up at the right moment, at the right intersection of history to do something. Danny Elfman was one of those. He was not a highly skilled he was a trained musician, to be sure, but he was not a highly like skilled in orchestration. He had to really learn that. He had to learn that hard stuff along the way. There's now 1,000 guys with that skill set and have heard all of his music and all the other people we talked about over the last hour, and know it, and they are encyclopedic about it. They know more about it than I do, and they are graduating every semester. So my advice to that young person, whether they're 16 or whether they're 18 and applying to college or something, is if you don't apply to college, if you don't go that route for the music industry, especially for film and TV, you will have a difficult time competing because there's 100 guys standing behind you with a broad skill set that are going to crush you. And um and does that mean you're not, you may work out and write some interesting pop or some cool beats, and that may work for this one particular project or projects like that, but you're going to have a very limited vocabulary. Would you be a writer and try to write even one short story if you were rudimentary in English? If you didn't have any spillings, if you didn't have any tools at all to start with, and you had not read a ton of literature beforehand, if you didn't have the basic knowledge of that, it's very difficult to compete in this industry now. And I've told that to people. They've called me and said, well, my son or my nephew wants to do this. What do you think he should do? I go to school. Well, where should he go to school? What if he can't get into college? It's going to be hard for them. And they said, well, is there somebody they can study with? I said, maybe, but that's going to take about 15 years. There's a lot of ways to be educated in the field. I'm not saying that some university program is the only solution to that, but just understand what you're competing against.
Yeah, and I get a lot of calls from students and even parents that are asking me, to talk with their kids, and they feel so guilty, like, oh, my grades aren't what they need to be to get in this school, and I say, look, you have a different path. I mean, look at me. My path was very crooked to get to where I was able to accomplish various things, but it was my path. Would I go back and change things? Sure, as we all would, right? But the power of realizing those stops along the way are there for a reason. Look at those stops. Those are halfway points. You get to move forward. It's your choice. You can stay put. You can make excuses, not move forward, and then look at all the people around you that are succeeding and just feel bad about yourself. I mean, come on, who has time for that? Who would want to be in that position, right? But there are those that they swim in it. Embrace your path. Go find a way to accomplish what you want to do.
Do you think a lot of young people today want to accelerate it? Like they just want to do it faster than maybe is appropriate,
Yeah, and I'll tell students who are earning their MBA, some of them want to just burn through the program and finish as quickly as they can. I'm like, hold on for a second. Tap the brakes. You need to learn from this journey. Take your time, because if just going through it, you're not absorbing those experiences and developing those relationships. So just slow down. I think we're so quick to just want to finish something versus just slowing down and realizing that journey is purposeful. Mark, thanks so much for being here. I've really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to maybe having you and Keith and John Davis on the same podcast episode in the future. That would be an amazing experience. Give us your website one more time.
menzamusic.com. Jeremy, this has been great, dude.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Menza. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe. This podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, and I appreciate your support.